over the dark night. She reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star.
Good afternoon and welcome as always. Dave DeCamp reports Trump and Putin to discuss potential Ukraine ceasefire this week. White House envoy Steve Witkoff said yesterday that President Trump will speak with Russian President Putin tomorrow to discuss the potential for a ceasefire in Ukraine. Quote, the two presidents are going to have a really good and positive discussion this week, Witkoff said. The two sides are at a lot closer today than they were a few weeks ago. We narrowed the differences. Does closer mean close enough? You narrowed the differences to what degree? Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. Here's the point. We have a tendency to view current events as though they take place in a vacuum, failing to understand the broader historic context in which most events occur. During each episode, my guests and I have probing, provocative, and in-depth discussions that connect the dots between these events and the broader historic context in which they take place, thus better enabling you to understand and analyze the events that are impacting the global village in which we live. On today's episode, the issue before us is Russian President Vladimir Putin has signaled that he's open to a ceasefire in Ukraine, but that he has questions about the 30-day U.S. proposal that need to be discussed. Can President Trump get the allies in line and get this deal across the finish line? Well, let's talk to my guest. He's a former Marine Corps intelligence officer who served in the former Soviet Union, implementing arms control agreements, and on the staff of General Norman Schwarzkopf during the Gulf War, where he played a critical role in the hunt for Iraqi Scud missiles and weapons of mass destruction. He served as a chief inspector for the UN in Iraq, leading the search for prescribed WMDs. He's the author of 10 books, including Disarmament in the Time of Perestroika and Scorpion King. Scott Ritter, my brother, as always, welcome back.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, Scott, I want to start the discussion here. By most reports, 3 days ago, President Putin said Ukraine must surrender after President Trump urged the Russian leader to spare the lives of Ukrainian soldiers following ceasefire talks between the U.S. and Russia in Moscow. Quote, at this very moment, thousands of Ukrainian troops are completely surrounded by the Russian military and in a very bad and vulnerable position. I have strongly requested President Putin that their lives be spared. This would be a horrible massacre not seen since World War II. Scott, based on your experience, based on your insight and military math, what does all of this say to you?
It says that the president doesn't have a complete grasp of what the reality is in Kursk. There's no doubt that the Ukrainians are in a very difficult position. But the notion that the cauldron that's about to encompass them, or maybe already has encompassed them, is of a scope and scale that matches the military disaster of Stalingrad, even the Falaise Pocket, where the Americans surrounded the Germans in the aftermath of Operation Cobra, the breakout from Normandy, the collapse of Army Group Center, or any of the horrific battles that were fought, on the Eastern Front between the Russians or the Soviets and Nazi Germany. The president is allowed hyperbole to kick in the extreme, and even President Putin, when he was responding to Trump's social media posting, what he said is that it's very difficult for the Ukrainians to retreat, that the one line of communication they have out is under fire control by the Russians, that the Ukrainians will have to abandon their equipment, and it'll be very difficult for them to try and make it out on foot. And this will become impossible in the next couple of days when the Russians are able to shut it down. So even the Russian president wasn't making the claims that President Trump was making. And the Russian president responded to President Trump's appeal for saving the lives of Ukrainians, and said, basically, lay down your arms and surrender, and we'll treat you humanely. But the Russian president has also gone on record as saying that every Ukrainian soldier who's captured in the Kursk area, will be treated as a terrorist, not as as a prisoner of war or a combatant, a terrorist. They had no right to be on Russian soil. And the actions that they committed while on Russian soil, terrorizing and murdering and raping Russian civilians, there will be justice. And he also made it a pointed note about the mercenaries, non-Ukrainians who are fighting there by the thousands, that they will not be afforded the rights under the Geneva Convention. And Putin didn't change either one. And this reflects the harsh reality of warfare, which I don't know if President Trump grasps. And the other thing is the one-sided nature of this conflict. Yes, Russians are suffering casualties. There's no doubt about that. And this is high-intensity modern warfare, which means that the Russian casualties are significantly greater than anything the United States suffered during the global war on terror. We didn't have a single day of combat in the global war on terror, whether in Iraq or in Afghanistan, that matches what's happening on a daily basis.
Oh, wow.
On a sustained basis. We never had the amount of artillery, shell fire, drones. We don't even know how to operate. So I would say that the president doesn't have a clue about the realities on the battlefield, and that this lack of appreciation of the battlefield lends itself to the hyperbole that he's thrown out there. The Kursk situation is resolved. I think that by the time the president has his conversation, the two presidents have their conversation tomorrow, I don't think Kursk is going to be an issue. I think the Russians have resolved this issue. There will be other issues on the battlefield, though, and I'm not confident in President Trump's ability to understand, to grasp the reality that exists, even though his Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State have often spoken about the need for these negotiations to be reality-based.
So if you understand that, then I can only assume that Lavrov and Putin understand that. So then how does that manifest itself through this phone call? I mean, is Putin sitting at his desk going, okay, Donald, yeah, right. How can anybody take, and when I say anybody, I mean on the Russian side of the telephone, how can they take anything that Trump says seriously?
Because his name isn't Joe Biden. Okay. I think we must differentiate, no matter how, and this comes down to assessments. If you want to call Trump naive, you want to call him inexperienced, you want to call him delusional, these are terms that people can debate. But what we can't call him is Joe Biden.
Okay.
The Trump administration has undertaken a policy path which is a distinct departure from the policy path of Biden and previous administrations, including Donald Trump's own first term. And the Russians recognize this. I have spoken to Russian diplomats about this, and they have said, look, you guys are going in the right direction. and we're happy about this.
Okay.
There's a lot of things that, aren't what we want. It's not how we would write the script, but from a strategic standpoint, the fact that the Russians, without doing anything, have gotten the American ship to, change course towards nuclear conflict. And that's the other thing I want to underscore. Had we not had a change in administrations, if Kamala Harris had won the election, we would be now, it's March, April, May, June, 3 months away from a nuclear war. 3 months away. And people go, how do you know? Look at the tension that exists. Look at the attitude of Europe. Look at the cockiness of Ukraine and understand how that would be magnified tenfold or by several orders of magnitude if there was a president that was encouraging this. We now have a president that says, I want peace. Joe Biden never said, I want peace. Joe Biden said, we will use war until we strategically defeat the Russians. We have a European community that is speaking of the need to humble the Russians on the battlefield. Humble the Russian, humble a nuclear power on the battlefield. We'd all be dead. We now have a president that says, I don't want that. We're moving toward peace. And if you're the Russians, you're going, that's sort of a good outcome. We'd like to see peace, especially from a president that recognizes the legitimacy of our point of view. And that's the other thing. Trump has said this war is about the expansion of NATO. Until Trump was elected, that was called a Kremlin talking point.
Mm-hmm.
Trump has said that Ukraine will never be a member of NATO. That was an unaccepted Kremlin talking point. I was put on 3 death lists. That means they're going to kill me by the Ukrainians. 2 of those death lists paid by U.S. taxpayer money, by the way, but that's a separate issue, because I had the audacity to say, among other things, that this was a proxy conflict between the United States and Ukraine, with NATO, the United States, and Russia, with Ukraine as the tool. We now have a Secretary of State who says just that, because it's the truth. It's real. So you're the Russians and you're looking at this thing and they're saying the right things.
Mm-hmm.
They're moving in the right direction.
Okay.
And I think from the Russian perspective, this isn't rolling your eyes. It's how do we keep on this course? What do we need to do this? And so I think the Russians are probably, I would imagine that there is counsel saying, what do we need to do to keep this in this right trajectory? How do we keep working with Trump to achieve this peace that we all agree should happen without, selling out to the soldiers who have died, the sacrifices that have been made? So they're looking for places where there can be commonality of thought. I don't want to predict the outcome. I think one of the places that they're talking about is the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, which is currently under Russian occupation and Russian operation. The Ukrainians can make a very effective claim that is Ukrainian property, even though it was Soviet property. It belonged to Ukraine and is essential for the future function of the Ukrainian economy. And so there could be a deal set that even if the Russians don't yield the territory, that the Ukrainians will be able to operate that plant. I don't know. I'm just throwing stuff out here, that there's things that can be considered. I've been told by the Russians this will never happen, but I could imagine a situation where the president would say, we're willing to draw a line going down the Dnieper River, roughly matching the current line of contact, and we'll give you, all of the Donbass, since that is yours. But we really can't sit here and demand that the Ukrainians withdraw from the right bank of Kherson and the areas of Zaporizhia that they currently occupy, because you haven't taken it.
Mm-hmm.
It was never yours.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just sit there and hold a referendum and say it's ours now because people voted. I think that's an argument that could be had, whether the Russians are willing to yield, because this would require going to the Duma, making tough decisions. But from the standpoint, if I were the Russians, I would say, okay, let's say we yielded on that. And I'm not saying the Russians will or even will consider that. What do we get in return? Because you're asking us to stop a conflict that we're winning. We would get this territory back if we continued. What do we get? And the answer has to be no foreign or at least no NATO peacekeepers. The Russians are saying if there is a peacekeeper force, it must come from neutral parties. I mean, we could be looking at Chinese troops, Indian troops, Brazilian troops, things of that nature. People from the African Union can come and police the Ukrainian side. I don't think any of them are going to be on the Russian side. The Ukrainian army has to shrink. There has to be demilitarization. That's a Russian requirement. There has to be elections that lead to a change in the constitution. That's denazification. So the Russians have some hard requirements of their own. What extent will Russia make compromises to achieve this, to bring this to an end? I don't think this thing ends with Russia getting everything Russia is demanding to get, because that, I think what would happen is that, Trump would be up his back against the wall and he couldn't sell that. But if Trump is going to sell a 30-day ceasefire to Europe and to Ukraine, the Russians are going to have to make some compromises so that Trump can say, I got this out of them. I got this. And these compromises will be serious, but they won't be the kind that put Russia at existential threat. We'll see. But I don't think Putin's rolling his eyes. What I think the Russians are saying is, we got the Americans actually moving in the right direction. What do we need to do to keep this moving in this direction? Because the Russians don't want this war to go on forever, and they don't want the United States and Russia to be at loggerheads. The world is a better place when our two nations have full diplomatic relations and are, operating, with economic cooperation as opposed to military confrontation.
So we've been hearing for a while now a discussion about a 30-day ceasefire, and President Putin has been on the record welcoming the idea, but says that it must include several conditions, including that the U.S. won't ship any new weapons to Ukraine. He also wants the Ukraine not to mobilize new troops or train new troops. President Putin went through a similar conversation a number of years ago with the Minsk Accords. So how does the United States, how does NATO, how do they negotiate this with that fear and that historic reality looming right before them?
Well, again, Trump isn't Biden. Trump isn't Obama. Trump is not responsible for the negotiation of Minsk. And if I were the Trump administration, I would just make that as clear as possible. Don't ever bring that up again, because we didn't negotiate it, and we're not asking you to go back to that. That's what we're walking away from. We're talking about full diplomatic relations, et cetera, et cetera. And then the other thing, if I were Trump, I would say, and there's a reason why my people are sitting in front of you and not anybody from Europe, because we know you can't trust them. We know they're liars. We know that they've failed you in the past. And there's another reason why Ukraine isn't here, because you can't trust them either. You can trust us. We're the people you have to learn how to trust. We're the ones that are going to, give the guarantees here. So negotiate with us. And that's just the harsh reality the Russians are going to have to accept. That. And I've had this conversation with Russians because they're like, well, we can't. I said, well, wait a minute. So you're telling me that you haven't seen a revolution in both domestic American political positions and our foreign policy. You're telling me you haven't seen anything. In the last 2 months, you're telling me you don't recognize that this administration, for right or wrong, whether you agree with it or not, has not made a dramatic departure from decades of past precedent. And if you're telling me you can't see that, then you're too blind for me to even talk to you about moving forward. Everybody has seen it. This isn't theoretical. This isn't about, trust me, I'm going to do these things. Trump is doing them as we speak. He's shutting down, for instance, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, the agencies that oversaw that. Again, I'm not making a judgment on that. I'm saying it's happened. And why? Well, those were, from the Trump administration perspective, bastions of not just Democratic leaning analysis and news broadcasting, but it was representative of Cold War thinking that's no longer viable if we're going to have better relations with the Russians. So it isn't just that we're dealing with the theory of a Trump revolution. We're living the Trump revolution as we speak. And so, that would be the other talking point I'd have with the Russians, which is this man is different. You can't say he's not. So without sacrificing, without, putting yourself in a existential crisis, work with this guy. because he is serious about moving in the direction of peace. And the other thing is, he respects Vladimir Putin. Donald Trump doesn't respect too many leaders. Vladimir Putin, he does respect, which means that Vladimir Putin, has some leverage here that he can push back against Trump without getting Trump, in a corner and behaving irrationally. But the key is how to push back, how far to push, how to keep this on track. What the Russians don't want to do is become all high and mighty and say, this is an absolute red line, we refuse to yield. I mean, because Putin could have already have done that. But
that's not diplomacy. And one thing we know about Sergei Lavrov, he's the consummate diplomat. So that Wang Yi, that's not their game. That's Tony Blinken's game. That's not their game.
I mean, I wouldn't give Blinken that much credit because he wasn't even competent enough to play that game. But that has been the American game.
You get my point.
I know what you're saying. Absolutely. And I would say, in all honesty, that's the game of half the people that are on the Trump team. But it's Trump who has basically said, no, I want this to go forward. Left to their own druthers, half the Trump team would say, this is a red line we can't cross, we demand, we insist. And you've seen Rubio has had to soften some of his words. Waltz had to soften some of his words because Trump is, the only guy that's been consistent is Witkoff, because Witkoff is literally the voice of Donald Trump in this case. But
Rubio hasn't had to soften his language. Rubio has had to articulate positions that he spoke against his entire time in the Senate.
Yeah.
I mean, he's in the room now saying, the world isn't flat. Gravity does exist.
Yeah, no, it's one day the history will be written. Hopefully, we all live, and we can do that. The history of the transition of Marco Rubio from Senator Rubio to Secretary Rubio to whatever he becomes in the future. He's a young man. He's a very ambitious man, and he's been given a unique platform here, one that Hillary Clinton thought would propel her to, the ultimate height. And that Rubio has that ambition because he has run for president several times in the past. So this transition, this transformation, it's not just a transition, it's a transformation, is something to be beholden. And I look forward to having a quality historian address this issue at some point. Hopefully I'm alive when that's written, because it would be a fascinating study in what motivates people. I mean, because you speak of principled values, what is your foundation? And what we're finding is that what we thought Marco Rubio's foundation isn't. Either that, or he is a man of such low ethical character that he can change when the wind blows.
That's my assessment up to this point.
I'm not saying it's not. I'm saying that I'm hopeful that it isn't, because we need a Secretary of State right now that's going to help guide Donald Trump through these very difficult waters. And that's a Secretary of State who, because let's put it this way, if his ethics are that bad, then we can't rely upon him to be a pillar of stability for Donald Trump, that he could fold at any moment, that he's simply setting Trump up for failure. So that's why I hope
I don't think that, but I think that Marco Rubio is such an opportunist that he understands this moment, and that he will do what he has to do in this moment to curry Trump favor. But and so for the next 3.5 years, or 3 years, 8 more, however much time we have left, that you can expect him to carry the water as he's being directed. But I just can't imagine anybody that has been as anti the positions he's taking for as long as he has taken those positions without divine intervention to have suddenly found Jesus. I just I
Well,
don't. Go ahead.
maybe Miriam Edelman's $100 million
Well,
brought that conversion that we're.
there we go.
But my problem with Rubio is that I actually think he's more like Nikki Haley than Paul, who saw the road to Damascus, the bright
Right.
light, and had the conversion. Nikki Haley was somebody who was very opportunistic, who served the president as the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, and then she and the president had a falling out, and then she proceeded to stab the president in the back because she was positioning herself to be, a future president of the United States, and we've seen that consistently. And my concern is that is who Marco Rubio is, and I would hope that that's not the case. I'm not a big fan of the biblical story of Paul. I sort of like Jesus, the way that the way that he was in the Bible, not the way that he became after Paul saw the light. But that's a theological discussion we could have at a different time. I prefer well-grounded people who are genuine in their beliefs, and I just don't know if Marco Rubio is genuine in his beliefs, as you've rightly noted. Everything he's saying today, and he says with enthusiasm, and he says with sincerity, is diametrically opposed to strongly held positions he had when he was the senator of the state of Florida.
You mentioned that look who's at the table and look who's not at the table. And Europe is not, NATO is not at the table. I've asked this of a number of guests. I asked Ray McGovern, and I'll ask you. Why is Europe continuing to beat this drum of militarism? Why is Macron now still talking about, well, we can send troops in, we don't need Russia's approval, we can do why is Europe still following the Biden path down the rabbit hole instead of understanding that the Trump position is a different position, is a position of peace, and that works out well for the world?
I think it's because this isn't their first rodeo dealing with Donald Trump. I remember in 2015, 2016, writing about this, saying that Trump is going to be undertaking policies which are very detrimental to traditional NATO posture, that he's talking about a redefining of relations with Russia and a diminished role of NATO, that NATO is not paying enough. And what happened is that NATO in Europe was able to make common cause with the deep state, the establishment, and create a united front that constrained Trump, contained Trump, and ultimately stifled Trump, until which time the reins of power could be handed back to an establishment president, Joe Biden. So that's their past practice. That's what they've done. It worked. Now we doubled down on this, and that during this last campaign of Trump, NATO didn't stay neutral. Europe didn't stay neutral. They actually actively campaigned for first Joe Biden, then Kamala Harris, for the establishment. And then they lost, and then they doubled down on stupid further by, instead of saying, okay, Trump, what do we need to do to work together? They worked with the Biden administration in its closing months to Trump-proof policies and to undermine Donald Trump's ability to govern as the president of the United States. And so now they are so far committed to being anti-Trump that the only thing they can do other than surrender, which these are politicians, that means admit defeat, back away, and no longer hold power. These are people who want to stay in power. And so what they're going to try to do is what they did last time: ride this thing out, constrain Trump, oppose Trump, box Trump in, continue to Trump-proof policy in hopes that Donald Trump is, I mean, we know Trump's going to be a one-term president, but that Trump is replaced by the establishment that comes back in. Only now are they recognizing the establishment ain't going to be there in 3 years. Trump is literally erasing it as we speak. And, but Europe can't afford to, shift over and change course. They are committed to being anti-Trump, being pro establishment. And this is why we see such a distinction between the two.
If Trump gets his way, what, in your mind, what does the peace actually look like? Is this about stability? Is it just about stability in the region and stability for Europe, or does this result in an actual shift in the dynamic? Your thoughts?
I think, again, it depends on the scope and scale of what Trump is able to accomplish. If Donald Trump can actually get us on a path towards peace with Russia, this changes everything. It literally changes everything, because the foundation, if you go back to George Soros's, his grand vision for, and I apologize for the dogs, but there's a FedEx truck that's parked out in front of my house.
So long as it's not the FBI, I'm okay with it.
I can't hit the delete button on the FedEx truck. I'm just hoping that the man delivers his package and leaves. George Soros, now they're all getting in the game. George Soros wrote an article back in the 90s that talked about, how he saw a post-Cold War construct. And one of the things he said is that, the centerpiece of the framework that's going to hold the world together is NATO. That you can't trust the United Nations, and there is no other competitor out there. That NATO is going to be the framework, and so NATO has been at the center of the rules-based international order. This military alliance, and you saw that we intervened in Libya. We used NATO in Afghanistan. We're talking about taking NATO to the Pacific. That's this thing. So for Trump to sit there and say that we are going to de-emphasize Europe and minimize the role of NATO, it means we're changing the entire game plan that was put in by the political and economic elites, whom George Soros is counted among, that has been running this show since the end of the Cold War. This is a fundamental transformation. It's not just a transition. It's not a redirect. It is a transformation that now applies look what he's trying to do in the Middle East. Not too successfully.
Well, it's not only Soros, it's Brzezinski as well, because Brzezinski has been at the core of this Russia-phobia. UN.
Right. I was just using Soros as an example. Okay. Soros is a part of it, but there's we got the World Economic Forum, we got Davos, we got the whole thing that's going on that put Europe at the center of the world, and that's literally what's been happening. This transatlantic relationship has been Eurocentric in terms of how they're going to control the rest of the world. And Trump is saying, no, I'm done. We're not doing this anymore. It's a failed concept. It's expensive. And all it does is head us down the path towards a potential third world war. And so Trump is trying to unplug from that. If he's able to fulfill this goal, this objective, it changes everything literally, because it means now that the driver of not just the American foreign policy, national security policy, but also economic policy, the military industrial complex is being minimized. It's not going to be eliminated. He's speaking of projects like the Golden Dome and all this kind of stuff. But the idea that we lead with the military, that's being de-emphasized. We're going to be leading diplomatically and economically, because that's what's going to define our relationship with Russia. If you take a look at the vast majority of the money that we've expended over the past decades, most of that money is spent on confronting the Russian threat, the big ticket items, aircraft carriers, missile submarines, bombers, things of that nature. Yes, we went off and fought a couple wars in Afghanistan and all that, but they never contained the budget numbers that we have with our nuclear enterprise, with the whole funding of NATO and things of that nature. What Trump is saying is we're reimagining everything. And the proof in the pudding is that he has already sent the directives out to the Pentagon to begin budget reductions of 8% per year for the next 4 years. Now, or did I get that right? It's because it's 40%, so it can't be 8%, 5% for the next 4 years, which would get us to, my math is off, but maybe it's 8%. But he's ordered significant reductions over the course of the next 5 years that would get us to 40% budget reduction in the defense budget. That means that he's no longer intent on playing the game we used to play. He's reinventing the game. And that's why this is so important, because if he succeeds here, then he can move on to making the other changes that he envisions making around. But if he gets bogged down, none of the other changes are going to happen. We'll be stuck in Europe. And tragically, that means that we'll still have the problem of nuclear war hanging over our head. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity. I don't know if Trump's the president to execute it, but he's the only president that's been willing to articulate this. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity to undo that ticking time bomb that's been existing in Europe since the end of the Cold War. NATO and its nuclear enterprise and how it interfaces with the Russians can only lead to one outcome, literally only one outcome, and that is a thermonuclear exchange between the United States and Russia. Trump right now is that guy on the bomb squad that's trying to, identify which wires to cut and all this stuff to diffuse that thing. And I wish him the best of luck. I'm not saying I believe he's going to succeed, but I do want him to succeed.
Is he changing the game, or is he changing the focus or the target of the game? And that question is based upon the thoughts from a number of people that he's merely de-escalating Russia so that he can turn his sights on China.
Well, again, I would say that the root cause of both the foundation that drives us towards confrontation with Russia is the same foundation that drives us towards confrontation towards China, and that is an America predicated on the need to sustain the rules-based international order. If you go back to the Biden administration and their national security strategy document that was published early on after he took over, Biden straight up said that the singular focus of the United States is sustainment of the rules-based international order, that is what defines us. That's how we integrate with the rest of the world. And Trump has said, no, the rules-based international order is the biggest threat to security in the world, that the greatest threat to the world today is America by trying to implement this policy. So he's literally saying we're not playing football anymore. I mean, he's saying we're playing a completely new game. We're playing hockey. Well, wait a minute, Mr. President, we've never worn skates before because we always played football. Learn how to wear skates. Well, Mr. President, we played on grass. Learn how to play on ice. It's a whole new game. He's changing everything. And that's the difference. He is destroying the establishment that was driving Chinese policy. See, I don't understand why people can say, okay, we get that he's trying to unravel the Russia thing, without understanding in order to unravel the Russia thing, you have to change the foundation altogether. You have to undercut everything that fed the Russophobia, et cetera. Well, to do that to China, you have to do the same thing. You have to undercut everything that fed the Sinophobia, all the prejudices that were crafted in. I think when we finally pivot to China, it's going to be because we're playing hockey, not football anymore.
Looking at the continent, looking at the Sahel, and how Niger and in the Sahel states have shifted away from France. They've shifted away from the United States. And you have now African countries developing stronger ties, stronger relationships with Russia and with China. Is this the death knell of American imperialism? Because I still see Donald Trump acting as an imperialist, as he talks about Canada as becoming the 51st state, as he talks about taking over the Panama Canal, as he talks about annexing Greenland. I still see him as an imperialist. He just seems to be changing the regions in which his imperialist focus is based.
Yeah, my take, because Trump has yet to publish his national security planning document. And
does he even have one?
Well, not yet, but it's only 2 months in. I mean, we have to be realistic. These documents Normally, in the first 100 days, they start putting together the teams. Trump
actually, my that last question was not based on a document. Actually, I should have been clearer with my question. That question was based more on a worldview. That's what I'm trying to get. Go ahead.
I think he does have a worldview, but unfortunately, my analysis requires me to read tea leaves from a coffee cup, if you know what I'm saying.
Well, that's why we're talking to you, because you can do that.
Well, I try. When I take a look at the things that he's articulated, this is what I see Donald Trump's world vision.
Okay.
That the United States is transitioning away from a rules-based international order that postures us to be the world policeman enforcing laws that we seek to impose on the world. Marco Rubio said just the other day that it's a multipolar world right now, and that America can't be dictating, so we have to be respect. Marco Rubio said this. Why? Because Donald Trump whispered in his ear, that's the way we go. So I see, we just, again, looking at the orders that have been given to the Secretary of Defense to work to disentangle us from European entanglements, to do the same thing in the Middle East. And Africa, we're going to shut down Africa Command. We're not going to be in the business of pouring American troops into Africa to be the tip of the spear of how America represents itself in Africa. So it's almost like we're yielding Africa to the multipolar world. Meanwhile, we are creating Fortress America. And I think this is what's driving Donald Trump. He wants to create an entity which is self-sufficient in resources, protected by two oceans, protected by a golden dome of missile, the whole thing. And he sees that Greenland is essential to that. I thought early on that what he was saying about Canada was a lark. I think he's very serious, and I actually believe that he could be well on his way to encouraging Western Canadian provinces to break free of Canada and become part of the United States. I think he's serious about redrawing the map of North America. I think he's serious about imposing American control over Central and South America through an expanded Monroe Doctrine, that he views these two continents as Fortress America, upon which then we make the pivot to confront what he believes is the greatest competitor to the United States, China. But in order to compete with China, we have to build up our own resource base and have interior lines of communication that gives us supply chain efficiency and sufficiency, so that we're no longer dependent upon Chinese control of global supply chains, so that now we can define a relationship with China on economic terms that allows us, again, to de-emphasize the military. I think that's his global vision. And so far, the policies he seems to be implementing point to that. Now, he hasn't articulated the way I did, but I have heard people in his administration speak of Fortress America. I have heard him talk about Greenland as absolutely essential to protection of the American homeland. And I have seen evidence that they are looking at, the reason why he wants to bring it into the war in Ukraine is to bring peace with Russia, so that we can de-emphasize our role in Europe and de-emphasize the role played by Europe in the world today. I think he is talking about completely walking away from Africa and yielding that. And I think the Middle East, he wants a peace, so long as that peace brings guarantee of Israel's continued, powerful position, which, for all the people out there saying that's impossible, almost happened right before October 7th. We were on the cusp of Israel normalizing relations with Saudi Arabia, which would have transformed that entire region, and everybody would have forgotten about the Palestinians. They were already forgotten. The only reason why we're talking today is because Hamas decided to initiate action on October 7th, which changed the entire picture. Trump wants to get back to pre-October 7th. That's what's driving him. That's his vision. Whether he'll be able to do that or not is another question altogether. But his goal isn't to conquer the Middle East. His goal is to disentangle America from the Middle East and leave the Middle East in the hands of nations that are working together. And here's the important word: economically. This is why the Israelis were such a big fan of Joe Biden's India, Middle East economic corridor. That's why Benjamin Netanyahu, when right after Biden made that statement, stepped up and he said, this is the most important thing that has happened in modern Israeli history. I'm not saying that. Netanyahu said it. Why? Because he recognized that if this goes forward and Israel does plug itself into the economy of the region, that it makes Israel a permanent member of the Middle East, no longer excluded, divided, isolated, but part of, in a way that allows it to dictate outcomes to its larger Arab neighbors. That's the world that Trump tried to impart when he signed the Abrams Accords, and it's the world I think he wants today. And so I do believe he has a global vision. Can he execute this global vision? I don't know. And one of the first hurdles is going to take place tomorrow with the phone call with Putin. But there's other hurdles. I mean, my God, when we're talking about the potential of American military forces going into Panama Canal, I don't think Americans have woken up to that fact.
No,
we're talking about an invasion of Greenland that would put us at odds with not just a NATO member, but Europe, fundamental odds.
Yeah,
we're
that's an
talking
Article
about
5 issue.
Pardon?
That's an Article 5 issue that we're starting. Well, similar to blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline. That was an Article 5 issue as well. But
yeah, we got away with that one.
We got away with that one.
The thing that blows my mind is what he's doing in Canada.
Right.
I mean, this is serious regime change and nation breaking up. This is a close ally, a friend, a neighbor, and we have a president who is actively working to dismember, to break it up, to absorb it. This is imperialism writ large. So I don't know if this world, there's two things. I don't know if he can achieve this world vision, but here's the bigger question. And I'm loath to say this at a time when I'm trying to get the Trump administration not to put the crosshairs on me like the Biden administration did, but I don't think it's good for America. I don't think this is the America that I took an oath to uphold and defend. We're not an imperial power. We're not a nation that goes around and commits regime change and seizes territory. We used to be. I mean, what the hell were we doing in the Spanish-American War? But, I thought we were evolving in the right direction. And this is an America that makes us literally defined as the bad guys in the world. We're it's one thing. We know that being the world's policeman isn't the right posture for us either, because all that did is bring war. But this is supposed to be a president who's speaking of peace, but it's peace based upon the establishment of an American empire that involves us forcefully imposing our will on people that otherwise wouldn't want our will to be imposed on them. And I don't think that's an America I can support.
Well, and because Donald Trump's language through his commercials is very clear. Peace through strength, which has not worked since post-World War II. So it's a great soundbite. It's a great I would tell my policy students all the time, you have to separate, when you're talking about policy, the theoretical from the practical. So theoretically, we can have these conversations about, oh, that sounds great, until you actually try to implement it. And then once you try to implement this policy, you're right back to being an imperialist power, which BRICS has let us know is not going to happen. So on the one hand, Marco Rubio can talk about a multipolar dynamic, but you're not going to recognize and admit a multipolar dynamic now and think that you're still then going to be able to operate as a unitary or unipolar hegemon. That's not going to work anymore.
No, and nor should it work anymore. I mean, it's not just that it isn't, it shouldn't work anymore. Look, I have no problem with America being strong. Why? Because we live in a dangerous world, and if you want to come at me, you should know that I will knock you out. Okay, but being strong doesn't mean being a bully.
Mm-hmm.
I think it'd be great for America to be the equivalent of Ryan Gosling. You know, a country that when we take off his shirt, everybody goes, "Oh my God, look at that." Okay, great. But put the shirt back on and come in and be smart and articulate and solve problems. Because that's what really the world needs right now, is the smart, articulate person who solves problems. It's good to look good. It's good to be in shape. I think we should be. But if we define ourselves, the problem with peace through strength is that you always feel that you have to prove that you're strong. You shouldn't have to prove you're strong. I mean, the best way to prove you're strong is to be strong.
Do the right thing.
It's just be strong and people will know it. If you're, again, I Game of Thrones reference, but when who was that punk little kid who blonde haired kid that became the king, began with a J, but he was shouting in there, I am king. I am king. And the grandfather, who was the hand and running it, said, "Go to your room." "But I am the king." He said, "Any man that has to sit here and shout, 'I am the king,' is not the king." And, we America needs to stop saying, "We're strong. We're strong." We don't need to say it. I tell you what, here's my hint to Donald Trump. Send your military to the weight room, walk up to the bench, put 250, 300 pounds on there, sit down, bang out 5 reps, put it up, and then walk out. And everybody knows you're strong. You don't have to go to the bar, get drunk, and get in a fight. Okay? People will recognize strength when they see it, and they'll respect strength that is constrained by honor and dignity. Because what's more important isn't that I can kick your butt. What's more important is that when I shake your hand, you trust me. That when I sit down and talk, you listen to me because my words are backed up with knowledge and wisdom. Having a strong, muscular idiot come to the table and grunt is not impressive. People aren't impressed by that. And coming in with your clothes ripped up and blood on your face because you just came out of a bar fight doesn't impress anybody either. We need to be leaders, and leaders,
especially if you lost the bar fight.
Yeah, well, that's a problem too. Yeah, that's a problem. That's a problem.
What did Putin say to Biden when Biden sent the Eisenhower into the Mediterranean? Why are you doing that? You're not scaring anybody. These people don't scare. And by the way, we can sink your aircraft carrier from here.
He just moved the MiG-31 the operational profile into the upper Black Sea, and he went, on there are the Kinzhals,
right?
And each one of those Kinzhals can sink your carrier, and you can't defend it. So, you move the Eisenhower, we move the Kinzhals.
Why are we doing this?
Yeah, why are we doing this? This is stupid.
Final question on this issue, and it's these North Korean troops that have been captured, or the 10,000 North Koreans that have, and Maverick, thank you for that. Thank you very much for that super sticker. Greatly appreciate it. The 10,000 North Koreans that are in Kursk, and the folks that I've talked to have told me that that these individuals are actually from the Russian Republic of Tuva, and that Tuva is on the border of Mongolia, and that the reason that these Europeans who think that all people with slanted eyes are North Korean is because they are from Central Asia. So if you could explain, if I'm off base, if you could help me out, but I don't think I'm off base.
Well, first of all, there's a difference between a Central Asian and an Asian. A Central Asian is more like a Turk, and so there's physical difference. Asian North Koreans are your classic Asians, but if you look at them, there was a time, Wilmer, and you know this, before civilized people drew lines on a map, and people just lived on the earth, and the Mongols were dominant, and there were other tribes that were conquered by the Mongols and held part of the Mongol Confederation and things of this nature. And the North Koreans are part of the Korean people, but they spread out. They made common cause with the Manchus, with the Buryats, with the Tuva, with on and on and on and on. These are Asiatic people. They speak different languages in many cases, but their physical features are similar. Not identical. I'm not going to be racist and say, one Asian looks like another Asian. That's like me saying, one white boy looks like another white boy. Well, there's a little bit of differences. Okay, we have white skin, and that might. But
well, let me tell you, Scott, all white folks do look alike. But anyway, go ahead.
Okay. All right, I'll concede that. But my point is this: Russia is a very diverse nation with a tremendous number of national groups. I'll also say that there's a lot of North Koreans in Russia, not because they just came over, but at the end of World War II, the Russians took over. First of all, the Russians made use of North Korean manpower. The Russians took over areas that were occupied by the Japanese and took control of labor camps, etc. Many people forcefully were moved around during the time of Stalin. But my wife is from Georgia. She's a classic Georgian. I mean, 100% Georgian. Her neighbor and one of her best friends in high school is a Korean. His father worked at the nuclear research facility there in Sinop in Sukhumi, but he is Korean. I mean, he is a honest-to-God Korean, ethnic Korean. You did the DNA test, he's Korean. But he was Soviet. He was Georgian. There's millions of them, maybe not hundreds of thousands, maybe in low millions, but there's a lot of Koreans in Russia today who are Russian citizens. So it is possible that you could get somebody in the military who's an honest-to-God Korean, but he's a Russian. But the people that they've captured, the documents show that they are from Tuva.
Right.
And they are not Koreans. And here's the thing: right now, in order to prove a diplomatic point, or to prove a propaganda point, the Ukrainians are threatening to turn these two prisoners over to the South Koreans. And I mean, this will create a huge diplomatic crisis because these are Russian citizens. These aren't North Koreans that have been captured by the Ukrainians. And anybody with a modicum of common sense who knows anything about Russia should know this. We know this. The Europeans know this, but we have to play, stupid games, which is we have to build upon this mischaracterization of these two prisoners to prove a point that Russia had to turn and allow North Koreans to come in and fight their fight. Therefore, the Ukrainians are, it's legitimate for them to ask the Europeans to come in and fight with them, because of what's good for the goose is good for the gander, except Russia didn't do that. Russia didn't bring in 10,000 North Koreans. This is a fabrication. There are units right now in fighting in the front that come from the Asiatic parts of Russia. And these units, have Kalmuks. They have, we saw the guy getting the knife fight. The Yakut, the Buryats, the Tuvans. They're all there. They're all part of Russia. They actually join the military. They're patriots of Russia. They volunteer to join the military, and they come and they fight in Russia's wars. They're not North Koreans.
And they speak Russian.
Speak Russian better than I do.
Well, North Koreans tend not to. They speak Korean. So it's kind of hard to integrate forces when you have major linguistic challenges. Final question for you, and thank you for your time today, Scott. When we look at the Donald Trump launching this attack on Ansar Allah in Yemen, and what's the point here? Because I don't really think that he's going to be able to make much progress in bombing Yemen.
Well, first of all, American warplanes and American bombs have been bombing Yemen since 2014, 2015, when Saudi Arabia began its war, and they were using American intelligence. Now, what I understand has happened is that we have American aircraft and British aircraft dropping American-made bombs or British-made bombs using American intelligence on Nasrallah. Why do we think we're going to have greater success right now than anybody's ever had in the past decade? It's beyond me. And when you take a look at Donald Trump's social media posting about this, this is not becoming of a president. And I just wish that he had a Secretary of Defense and a Secretary of State and a chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff who would send him in having an intervention. Say, Mr. President, you can't do this. We are a serious nation. You're acting as if this is a game, a childish game. You're demeaning the service of the men and women who honor us by wearing the uniform of the United States of America, who are doing the hard job right now of defending America. And they're willing to do what needs to be done, but you can't trivialize it and pretend that it's some sort of, campaign posturing. You have to stop using these words. We will bomb you and make you afraid, and we will do no military professional speaks like that.
Unleash the hell upon you that you have not experienced.
You're not experienced.
You have no idea what Ansar Allah means.
Yeah.
What that translates into, and how long these people have been on the planet.
They just put millions of people in the streets in the cities in Yemen saying, "Bring it on."
Right.
Bring it on. We don't. There's a video I asked just people to watch because I think it's we all watch American war movies, and you've seen it. I mean, the brave American soldier with his helmet and stuff gets hit, and he's on the ground. Oh, help me! And the other brave American soldier comes out and picks him up and carries him off to safety and all that. And we're like, wow, you ran 100 feet and you picked him up and you brought him 100 feet. And there's a video of an Ansarallah Houthi soldier. He's wearing sandals in a dish dash, but he has gone down and he's picked up his wounded comrade, and he's running across the desert as the entire Saudi Arabian army is opening up on him, and the bullets are hitting around him, zinging by his head, going through his feet. You can see it hitting his clothes, and he just keeps running, and he runs an impossibly long distance with this guy. He never faltered, and he made it to the end. That's your average Houthi fighter. Every one of them is a lion at heart. He could have been hit by the bullet. They die just like everybody else. No one is pretending that the Houthi can't die. Of course they can die. But if you think these are the people that are going to cower in fear because of a social media posting put out by Donald Trump, you don't know anything about these people. And if you treat them as being ignorant people, as Marco Rubio appears to do by denigrating their engineering capacity, these are smart people who know how to make missiles. They are manufacturing hypersonic missiles as we speak. They know how to use these missiles. They are cultured. They are educated. They are sophisticated. We have a total incomprehensibly poor appreciation for who these people are. And if you think that they're going to just yield because Donald Trump has put out a mean-sounding social media tweet, you don't know anything about these people. The easiest thing for Donald Trump to have done to prevent all this would have been to send Steve Witkoff to Benjamin Netanyahu and say, stop blockading Gaza, get the humanitarian goods back in, or the Houthi are going to come back and we're not going to help you. They're going to strangle your economy and you're done. And look what we did. It cost the price of an airline ticket, and it's done. We're now in a war that's going to end up costing us probably over $100 billion by the time we're done, and we're not going to win. This is that bar fight that we don't win. And that's humility, because peace through strength, you don't have the strength if you get your butt kicked every time you step in a bar. You're not impressing anybody. Everybody's like, well, then just come back into my bar and I'll kick your butt again. And what are the Iranians?
It's Friday. It's 7:00. He's back.
He's back. But,
he got paid. He got paid
to intimidate the Iranians,
and he's back.
Yeah, he's trying to intimidate the Iranians by saying he's going to do harm to the Houthi. He doesn't know either Iran or the Houthi. The Iranians will not be intimidated. They're darn sure aren't going to be intimidated when you walk into the Houthi bar and they beat you up, and the Iranians are sitting in the bigger bar, the one with the weight room upstairs, and all their boys are upstairs lifting weights going, you really going to come to us? This could be solved diplomatically. And this is what confuses me, because Donald Trump understands the complexity of diplomacy that he's trying to work out with the Russians. This is a really complicated thing they're trying to do. The solution to the Houthi problem is the simplest solution in the world that doesn't cost anybody anything. Tell the Israelis to stop starving the people of Gaza, to let the humanitarian goods in. And if you do that, the Houthi problem goes away. You don't have to, go to the Iranian bar and get your butt kicked. And you actually have a chance of bringing a peaceful outcome to Gaza. But what you're doing right now by saying that you have to be tough is you're going to screw the whole thing up. And when we're going to get involved in a large-scale war in the Middle East that is going to destroy global energy security, make the price of oil go through the roof, and whatever Donald Trump thinks he's trying to accomplish in this term with all these dramatic changes, collapsing the American economy is not the foundation upon which revolutionary change that's pro-Trump can occur. It could lead to revolutionary change to get rid of Trump, as the American people rally around the fact that this is a madman who is trying to destroy America and the world. That's not the global vision that Trump had. That's not the domestic vision. Why he's making such a fatal mistake about the Houthi is beyond me.
You got 2 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. So, because to your point, and what came to mind was you talked about global oil access. Ansar Allah is controlling the Red Sea, and then you have Iran on the other side with the Persian Gulf. And they demonstrated, I want to say, maybe 8 or 10 months ago, they captured a ship. Iran captured a ship in the Persian Gulf. The last time Ansar Allah was lobbing missiles into Israel to demonstrate, this is my interpretation, but I don't think I'm off. And Kevin, thank you for that super sticker. To demonstrate we can do this. I ask this question a lot. Is the United States confusing restraint with weakness?
I don't know why they would, because first of all, Iran has sent a signal to us after Donald Trump assassinated Qasem Soleimani. Iran fired missiles at the Al-Assad air base. They hit every target they wanted to hit with precision, saying we can do this anywhere around here. They shot down a Global Hawk drone over the Strait of Hormuz, and Trump was going to retaliate by bombing targets in Iran. His chairman of the Joint Chiefs says that this will begin a cycle of violence that will lead to a general war that will require us months, if not years, to assemble the 700,000 troops that we'll have to bring in to assert our authority over Iran. And then there's no guarantee of victory because they now have ballistic missiles that can hit our fleet before it comes in. Mr. President, we don't want to do this. And Trump stood down. The fact of the matter is, we know, the United States, the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Secretary of Defense should know that, while we can beat Iran with nuclear weapons, if we get into a general fight with Iran, we know, for instance, that the Iron Dome shield of Israel doesn't work. Mm-hmm. That if Iran ever executes True Promise 3, that they will destroy Israel. They will also destroy every American base in the region. We have no air defense systems capable of defending that. They will shut down the Strait of Hormuz. They will destroy Saudi oil fields, Kuwaiti oil fields, United Arab Emirates oil fields, while we're destroying their oil fields. And all that guarantees is that the world energy security is destroyed. And then price of oil goes up to 120, 150 bucks, doesn't come down, and the American people, it won't be good. We know this. This isn't a thing of Trump going, I didn't know. Mr. President, you were president when you were briefed on this very thing. Why didn't you pull the trigger last? I know you made up a story about how you cared about the people on the ground, but the real answer is you peed your pants when the Pentagon came in and said, we can't win this one. Mm-hmm. That if you do this, we're going to get involved in a war that we have to mobilize 700,000 troops that we don't have. That means you're going to have to go to the American people and actually tell them it's time to go to war against Iran. All the kids in college have to come out. You might have to do selective service. And he didn't want to do that.
We've just become Ukraine with press gangs and snatching people off the street.
Well, hopefully we won't get to that thing. But my point is, when I was in the military back in the 80s, we had a military that could fight 2.5 wars and supposedly win them. We were confident that we could. 2.5 wars. That's a major war in Europe, a major war in Asia, and a holding action in the Middle East until we won one of those 2 wars and diverted the resources in. That cost us a lot of money to build up that military. Mm-hmm. When the Cold War ended, we went down to 2 wars, then we went to 1.5 wars, then we went to 1 war, and today we're probably at a half a war, meaning that we don't have a military, an active military that can win a real war right now. In order to fight a war, we would have to mobilize. And we've made it so that it's so expensive to mobilize that the impact on the American people from a political standpoint would be detrimental to whoever was in office. So maybe peace through strength isn't the good posture to have when you've deliberately created a system that can't go to war against a major opponent. Can't.
Final point, and I thank you for your time. When I was talking about Ansar Allah, folks, you have to understand what that means. Ansar Allah transfers from Arabic to English, helpers of God.
Yep.
And that comes from the time of the prophet, may peace be upon him, when he transversed that region. The Houthis protected him as he traversed through the region. If you have internalized as part of your culture that mindset, if your job is to protect God, folks, give it up.
Give it up. And I'll just
you will not win that bar fight.
I'll say one last thing too, because this is important to what we're doing, because we're having a discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of the discussion is to inform your audience based upon the dialogue that we have. I had the honor and privilege for several months to be in direct contact with the spokespeople of the Ansarallah military.
Okay.
And we would have conversations, and they would educate me. I always viewed it as an educational process. They contacted me originally because I couldn't pronounce Babel. I can't pronounce it either. The Babel Mandeb, thing. And they were like, we'll help you out. And while we're here to help you out, we'll also talk to you. And they have questions. We had nice conversations. Great people, intelligent people, the whole thing. But because of the sanctions, the fact that the Trump administration has labeled them a terrorist organization and such, legally, I'm not allowed to talk to them right now because they are a terrorist organization. This is to the detriment of America, because Dr. Wilmer Leon has invited me onto his program, and he wants to tap into my head. And my head is informed by that which other people empower me with. And I was, for a while there, fairly well informed about the Ansarallah movement and its in its mission and what they wanted to do, not because I was a supporter, but because they viewed me as an honest broker and they empowered me. And we don't have that today, and we're weaker for it. And in this day and age of information warfare, where knowledge is power, everything our country does to limit access to the American people of alternative points of view and alternative facts weakens us collectively as a nation, as a people.
Scott Ritter, thank you. Cherie, Dr. Wilmer Leon, is it possible for cultures to outgrow the culture one has been brought up in? If so, how is that possible? You know what? Well, let me just quickly say, in this instance, I don't think so. That's a great question. But
it's like
go ahead.
It's like asking a redneck if he outgrew NASCAR. It ain't
gonna happen.
Ain't gonna happen.
It ain't gonna happen. Especially when that element of the culture is so key to your reality. Then I don't. You'd have to ask a mind.
If you were from a Christian culture, and it's hypothetical, but let's say there was a Christian clan that carried the cross, and bore the cross of Jesus, and then and that was what defined them. They were the ones who bore the cross of Jesus, and that goes from back, and in their entire life they live that. That is who they are. You can't outgrow that. If you've the Ansarallah movement, the Houthi, are sincere in their beliefs. There's nobody more sincere in their beliefs. They are the defenders of Islam. They are the protectors of the Prophet. And when you're born, and this is ingrained into you in everything you do, how do you outgrow that? You don't outgrow that.
Scott Ritter, as always, man, thank you so much for your time. Greatly appreciate that analysis. And as always, look forward to having you back.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Scott. Folks, You've been listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. New episode tomorrow. Regis Tremblay will join us from Crimea tomorrow. Please follow and subscribe. We've got 6,000 subscribers. Let's see if we can get to 7,000 by Friday. Can you all help get us to 7,000 by Friday? Please leave a review, share the show. Follow us on social media. You can find all the links below in the show description. This is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge, because talk without analysis is just chatter. And we, listen to Scott Ritter, we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. See y'all tomorrow. Until then, I am Wilmer Leon. Have a wonderful remainder of your day. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.